dropping significantly, not only the fuel surcharges, but because of the drop-off in demand, transportation is dropping. So to be able to move steel from the southeast to the northwest is not as prohibitive anymore. You can do that. So it just goes to prove out the fact that in the last 3 months, a lot of things have changed. And we're evaluating that too. And surprisingly, it's very difficult to come up with what you're paying in terms of a market price of steel. There's a lot of opaqueness in the steel business. It's not like natural gas on a NYMEX or oil or lead or copper or tin. The mills have made it very difficult for you to figure out exactly what you're paying compared to your peer companies. And we have an active effort underway to make sure we understand that. So that's kind of, the point of the whole thing here is that we're having to respond to the globality in a different sector that commands a massive position in our cost structure. We're a $10 billion a year company. We're spending about $3 billion a year on fabrications and raw steel. If we don't have a really close understanding of what's going on in that market and we're not responding to the market in terms of following where the lowest cost of steel is, we're going to be at a severe disadvantage. And that has dramatically changed in our business in the last couple of years, primarily because steel companies have combined and they now have a pretty significant position in terms of power relationship, buyer-seller power relationship, compared to where they were in the past. So, the second example of another company responding to the globalization of industry.
Any questions for Tim?
Questions?
Do you manufacture engines?
No, we don't. No, we buy all our engines. We buy them from everybody.
Yeah.
Today.
I kind of figured that was the answer.
And we buy many from Cummins. We buy a bunch from CAT, our competitor, our peer, and our supplier too. Deutz, Kubota, pretty much all of them. We have an active effort underway because Tier 4 emissions changes, off-highway emissions changes are coming in 2010. And we're actually doing an advanced sourcing project across all of our platforms to make sure that we cross-functionally select our engine guys going forward. That hasn't been done in the past. Yes?
What do you think moving into the future, now that you're trying to get an idea of your costs, as logistics plays a role at getting to where you need it to be, what do you think is a challenge moving into the future logistically for you guys?
We're seriously challenged coming out of Asia, for sure. We're trying to source a lot more material out of Asia, and we don't have the understanding on the ground of what's going on in China. We don't have an organization that takes care of distribution and logistics. So we're clearly looking, and since the supply lines are so long, you need to know where everything is at any given point in time. We try to practice just in time. We have some factories that are very good at it, some that are not, some that maybe don't really need to be. But clearly, when you've extended the supply chain from 4 hours to 4 weeks, you better have a better idea of where that material is. So we're very active at India and China to make sure that we have a professional logistics company who can help us manage that.
You said India as well.
India and China.
Are you also buying steel for your suppliers?
Well, that's an interesting concept. We do that for one company here in the U.S. Our going forward strategy for all of our fabrications and burnouts is that we will have a pricing deal with the mills that you will use. If you can get steel less than us, then you don't have to use it. But it'll be surprising if they can get steel less than us. And that's, as you saw on that chart, there's a big mill activity that I'm directly involved with. And that's to set up relationships with the mills so we can not only buy it direct, but we can also provide that pricing structure to our subs. We only buy 25% of our steel direct. And we buy 850,000 tons a year, which is about the size of BMW, maybe a little bit smaller. BMW buys cold rolled sheet, not so complicated. We buy a lot of different stuff, a lot of different alloys. We have 25 to 30 different plants around the world. Every one of them has their own engineering systems. Most of them have their own material specs. Most of them have their own welding specs. Think about the complexity. Yes?
How many steel suppliers do you have and where are they located?
Everyone and all over the world now. Algoma, Everest. Surprisingly, we don't do any business with Nucor, but we're having. We met with them last week, and now that the power shift has occurred, there's a lot more willingness to talk. ThyssenKrupp, Chorus, Arcelor. We have pretty much business with everybody. But that's the real question. Battle Steel, question is really who should we have business with in the future, and I don't have that answer yet, but by the time we close the year going forward, we'll have a much better handle on about 60% of it anyway. We have two real distinct grades of steel too. We buy mild steel, 1040 type low carbon steel, and we buy high tensile strength, heat treated, quench and tempered steel, which is, we buy that for our cranes business because weight is very important for these vehicles going over the road. And if you think about a cement mixer or a big dump truck, we also buy high-Brunel steel because abrasion, over time dump trucks dump enough loads of gravel, next thing you know that there's nothing left in the dump. So we buy high-Brunel steel to make sure that it wears long. So we have those two grades, and the two grades, the mild steel and the quench and tempered, are entirely different supply markets. The supply and demand balance is shifted so much that you have to address it differently. For instance, the quench and tempered was really in the U.S., it really went out of sight in the last 3 years because of the MRAP vehicles, the armored vehicles that the U.S. was deploying in Iraq. They sucked up all the quench and tempered capability in North America, which made companies like us struggle.
In terms of the prices that you charge, how does exchange risk get sorted out? Is this something where things are priced in dollars, or are you selecting the currency depending on time of day, or what is it?
It's a mixed bag. We work closely with Treasury to make sure that we're appropriately hedged. We will likely buy in the local currency, right? And we will likely use forward forecasts to figure out what's going to happen over time. It's almost like playing the stock market, right? But we kind of think that major shifts occur over 2 to 3 year terms. They may start, but they'll take 2 to 3 years to really shift, and by then we'll respond accordingly. So the currency is a factor in the total cost evaluation. With the big companies that have high gross margins, we'll push the currency risk back on it. Let the engine guys, the hydraulic companies, tire people, axle people, they've got the wherewithal and the knowledge to go ahead and do business in dollars or pounds or euros. The smaller companies, you can't shove the currency risk onto them because they'll just, you got to make sure they stay viable.
Any other questions for Tim? No,
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Don. Thanks, Ted, Andy, Kerry, and Tim for a great presentation. Our goal was to stick with giving everybody sufficient time to make the presentation rather than rush it. It's time for a short coffee break, right, Mary? Okay. Time for a coffee break. We will stick with the planned time for the coffee break and cover it in the session. So we'll take a half hour for the coffee break. No? 15 minutes. Okay, 15 minutes for the coffee break. So drink your coffee quickly. Okay. If not, can people bring in the coffee here?
Oh yeah, bring it in.
Yeah, bring in your food, relax. Ignore the direction there which says no food. So we'll convene at 2:45 for the last session. Thanks.
So we'll go on a commercial residential.